Michelle. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Okay, so there we go. So we're going to be giving them 5 minutes to come in. Let's see.
Recording in progress.
There we go. Okay. All right, so we are now live on Facebook. Okay. All right. So we got a lot of people in. I think we don't have anybody waiting right now, so maybe we should just go ahead and start. You want to give it a little more time, or are you guys ready?
Ready.
Okay.
I'm okay.
Okay, everybody, welcome to the Truth and Democracy Coalition's monthly meeting. I want to thank all of you for showing up, the regulars, everybody who comes. I'm very pleased that you've come today. With the election on Tuesday, we're going to hear from our own Dom Jones, who will be speaking to us about the history and importance of voting from her perspective as an African-American woman. But first, what I want to do is tell you about the Truth and Democracy Coalitions, make some announcements, and then introduce our speaker. So the Truth and Democracy Coalition was formed to build a pro-democracy movement in America. It educates the public about disinformation, teaches people to be critical of the propaganda they consume, and produces critical analysis of current events and social issues. We produce media and educational materials, hold seminars and meetings, work with other organizations, and organize events and activities geared toward building a pro-democracy movement in America. The coalition seeks to build a community of people of different faiths and ideologies to defend and promote democracy locally, nationally, and globally. So we're recording this session, and so when you speak, if you make sure to turn on your video if you can, because it will also go on YouTube, and it will be reproduced and republished on YouTube and Facebook and in audio form on our Truth and Democracy podcast. Our YouTube handle is youtube.com/@Truth and Democracy Coalition. And I'm going to post all these links that I'm going to give you now in the chat so that you'll have them. And remember, when you go to the YouTube page or to any of these pages, like, share, and subscribe. Now, I just published part 1 and we'll publish part 2 of our Halloween episode. Will Putin use nukes in Ukraine? A tarot reading. Now, this is a serious question, and I take my tarot reading very seriously. So this is definitely, let me see if I'm getting some feedback here. Make sure everybody's muted, okay? All right. So, yeah, so I take my tarot reading seriously. This is definitely not for entertainment purposes only. So check that out. My readings have proven to be reliable. On December 11, 2022, we're going local. We'll be speaking with Stephanie Vallejo, leader of the Whittier Neighborhood Organization and Whittier Term Limits. And she will talk about barriers to democracy at the local level and what to do about it in the city of Whittier, California. And you can register for that at tinyurl.com/Whittier Term Limits. Also, mark your calendars for early next year to be in Whittier for our January 6th Celebrate Democracy event. It will be at 7 p.m. on Friday, January 6th. We're going to have music, food, speakers. So put that on your calendar and plan to be there. Then on January 8th of next year, we're having Braver Angels come to talk to us about how they depolarize social and cultural issues by holding discussions and debates. And there will be more on that to come. And finally, I want to thank you for your support as we advance forward with our efforts to defend democracy. Go to our webpage, truthanddemocracycoalition.com. And now to our program for today. Dom Jones is a community leader, business owner, TV personality, and co-founder and chief executive officer of Democracy, an organization that helps young women run for office. Dom serves with Planned Parenthood on the Electoral and Advocacy Committee. She is CEO and owner in Huntington Beach, California, of a premier indoor cycling studio called Propel Cycle, Inc. She can be seen on season 34 of The Amazing Race on CBS. As an African-American minister who worked with special needs youth, Dom understands the needs of the disenfranchised. She works to build unity and love among neighbors and to free our nation from division and strife. She will speak about the history of voting rights and the importance of voting in America. Welcome, Dom Jones. And let me put you up and get you spotlighted. All right. Go ahead, Dom.
Okay. Hello, everyone. How are you? I hope everyone is having a good Sunday. I'm so excited to be here with you. I just want to take a moment to acknowledge everyone that is here. So I see some familiar faces, of course, Ellie and Dixie and Denise. I see some other faces that I'm just very pleased to see. So welcome to our community. Hermione Beard, hello, how are you? Glenda, Zhang, Noble, Terry, Samuel, Myra, Kuana, Deborah, Barbara, Susan. It's so good to see everyone. Uida Watson, hello.
Oh. Did we lose Dom? Maybe she'll come back on pretty quick.
No.
In court.
It looks like she's trying. We'll give her a call. Oh, there she is. She's back. You back, Dom?
Yes, can you hear me?
I can hear you now. You sort of cut off right at the beginning of where you were at.
Okay, everyone can hear me, right? Yes?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. I'm actually on two devices here, so let me get off the other one. Okay, there we go. So yes, right now we are 2 days away from our midterm elections. And right now we are in the middle of one of the most pivotal primary elections of our lifetime. This election season that we are in is truly all about protecting democracy. There is a faction of this country that wants to hold us back. There is a faction of this country that desires to prevent progress. In fact, they completely do not accept anything that, in the lane of progress. Not only that, but there are dark systems at work right now that are endeavoring to prevent so many people from voting themselves. Today, what we're going to do is we're going to talk a little bit about the history of voting. Specifically, I am an African-American woman. That is how I identify. And my ancestors are slaves. And so I have a very interesting history within my blood, but I also want to share with you all really the arc of history, where we are today, from whence we come from, why we are here, and where do we go from now. So let's start to talk about voting rights. So the struggle for voting rights in the United States, it really does date all the way back to the founding of this nation. The original U.S. Constitution, it didn't define voting rights for citizens, and until 1870, only white men were allowed to vote. And two constitutional amendments changed that. Do you remember which ones they were? The 15th Amendment, which was ratified in 1870, extended voting rights to men of all races. However, this amendment was not enough because African Americans were still denied the right to vote by state constitutions and laws, poll taxes. How about this? Literacy tests. Literacy tests. And does that sound familiar? Because they're trying to do something very similar today. We'll get to that. And the 24th Amendment, which was ratified in 1964, it partly addressed this injustice by prohibiting the use of poll taxes in federal elections. In addition to these amendments, the Voting Rights Act of 1965 secured voting rights for adult citizens of all races and genders in the form of federal laws. But notice this, my friends. The 15th Amendment was passed by Congress and ratified during the Reconstruction era. This is history, but it's very important. When the progressive wing of the Republican Party, listen to this, dominated Congress during the decade following the end of the U.S. Civil War. Remember, where Democrats are today and where Republicans are today is not what they once were. It was in reverse before. Republicans back then were the progressives, and Democrats or the Dixies were from the South, and they were truly against progress of everyone. They really wanted to really focus on the Confederacy having power in this country. So when Reconstruction collapsed with the withdrawal of federal troops from the former Confederate states in 1877, the white supremacist wing of that then Democratic Party dominated the South. And voting rights for Black men in the former Confederate states were rescinded. There's a lot of that going on today, rescinding in courts and in state and local laws. And those rights were further restricted, again, by literacy tests, intimidation, and fraud. The infamous grandfather clause, which restricted voting rights to men who were allowed to vote or whose male ancestors were allowed to vote. Before 1867, it was also a popular method of disenfranchising African Americans because they weren't allowed to vote before the 15th Amendment was ratified. I want to stop for a second in this history lesson and discuss a little bit of something here. If you notice, this country was built, and I'm going to be straightforward with you because I'm a very honest and open person. This country was built on the backs of slaves. It was. Okay? This country would not be who it is today. It would not have gone through Reconstruction, through the Industrial Revolution, and through everything else that invigorated this country to become a worldwide just behemoth without free labor. See, free labor will get things done if it's free, right? And for hundreds of years, slaves that were brought here across the waters from Africa, from the west coast of Africa, brought to this country and into Brazil in the transatlantic slave trade, were used to build this country, were completely and atrociously treated like cattle. In fact, the 3/5 Compromise, do we remember that? They weren't even considered a full human being. They were property. And as this time progressed and slaves began to recognize that it is not humane to enslave another human being, that they too were human, as they began to read, because remember, during slavery times, it was illegal for them to read. And if they were caught with a book or with a Bible that was used, the Bible was used. You know what the Bible was used for? The Bible was used to tell slaves that you're meant to be a slave because, you see, God talks about how we must care for our slaves. And without the literacy, they thought, oh, this must be the case. Coming from a land into a new country, what are you to believe? But when they began to read and they began to come into understanding and they began to fight, people like Frederick Douglass, so many others like Harriet Tubman in the Underground Railroad, and so many others who paved the way, they began to demand equity and equality as they should have. And this moves us into the 20th century, into the leaders of that time in voting organizations, because the 24th Amendment And the Voting Rights Act emerged from their historical contexts, in this case, the civil rights movement and voting rights initiatives of the 1960s. There were certain organizations that functioned to progress and move forward so that African Americans could have equality. These groups were the Congress of Racial Equality, which was called CORE, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, SCLC, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, what is that? The NAACP, which is here down till this day. And by activists that we all know, Dr. Reverend Martin Luther King, John Lewis, who we know recently passed not too long ago, Ella Baker, Bob Moses, Stokely Carmichael, and so many others. In 1963, they came together, and the SNCC organized the Freedom Vote, a mock election among Southern Black people that was designed to encourage these citizens to register to vote. So you see, they had all these people. That's right, Myra, good trouble. They had all these people that they had enslaved for hundreds of years, now beginning to seek freedom, now beginning to seek equity and equality and imparity. And when you have such a large constituency of people rising, pushing for their progress, they became afraid. The powers that be, the white nationalists, to be quite honest with you all, became afraid. And this is very important because voting rights activists, they faced violent opposition in the South, both from law enforcement and the white residents at that time who were raised under these ideologies. Now, law enforcement, we know law enforcement has had a long history. Do we know the history of law enforcement? Do we know what law enforcement comes from and what the original inception of it was about? Let's talk about it. Law enforcement initially, as Black Americans began to gain freedom and began to gain rights to walk the streets, not off the side of the street, but on the street, you see, as these Black Americans began to stand up and really seek to be equal to those around them, law enforcement was used to help keep Black Americans from certain spaces that white supremacists at that time didn't want them in. It was used now during Jim Crow. Law enforcement was used as the new slavery. You see, let's go and get these Black and brown men and we'll put them in jail. They won't have the numbers. Their votes won't count. We'll make people felons who cannot vote, you see, and then their votes don't matter and we don't have to worry. The original inception of law enforcement was to enforce white supremacist ideals. This is why, my friends, till this day, there is such a large movement of people, whether we agree with them or not, that really feel that law enforcement needs to be greatly overhauled because those remnants of how it actually began, the very purpose of it, today they are to protect and serve all people. But those remnants of the way society was run are still in the underbelly of law enforcement today. That's why there is an unprecedented number of African Americans in prison. Why are African Americans 13% of the population, but Black and brown men and women are over 60% of the jail population? That is a huge disparity. And that is not just a disparity, that is an inherent, embedded in society coup, if you will, to keep these men and women off the streets so that this country does not have equity for all. So really, many Freedom Summer activists during the time that they faced opposition were arrested by local police officers. Some were beaten. 3 young men, James Chaney of Mississippi and Michael Schwerner and Andrew Goodman, were killed in June of 1964 by the Ku Klux Klan. In addition, dozens of homes, businesses, and churches were destroyed. Even another violent incident occurred when with John Lewis, they marched across the Edmund Pettus Bridge. I know you guys know about that. Out of Selma, the marchers were blocked by state troopers and deputized white men who then attacked the marchers with clubs and tear gas. What did we see just recently? This is all about voting, my friends. What did we see recently during the Black Lives Matter movement, which again, by a faction of society was demonized as being a violent group of people? But I can tell you personally, I live in Huntington Beach and we had some Black Lives Matter activists here. And I went out there to be with the movement and just to see what was really occurring. They were very peaceful. They were trying to take a stand. But do you know what else I saw on Pacific Coast Highway Boulevard here in Huntington Beach? There was another side of people that came and they were violent and they were mad and they were angry. And they were trying to infiltrate and mix with these peaceful Black Lives Matter movement individuals standing for peace and equity for Black Americans to make it look like that they were being violent, but they were not, you see. It's so important for us to recognize that these factions at work that are now very much far right wing have now made their way into the mainstream. See, Republicans are not the Republicans of old, the John McCain's. Even I had someone I know who was a Republican and they just said, oh my goodness, George Bush looks like a Democrat compared to what we see today. Because what are people doing? And Richard Presida has talked about this. This is why I love working with Richard. He's talked about the propaganda. The propaganda is real. It's very real and it's out there. It's insidious. And it's infiltrating all of the devices that everybody is on. So it's so important for us to understand and remember that voting is something that will always be attacked. And right now, in the state of Atlanta, where our wonderful Stacey Abrams is fighting very hard, you see. What did Stacey Abrams do? She helped flip. They're very afraid of that woman. She helped flip Georgia. One of the deepest, reddest, and slave-holding states, by the way, historically. She helped flip that state to blue, you see, by encouraging Black Americans to vote. Because let me tell you something. A lot of Black Americans don't want to vote sometimes because they feel that their needs are not looked out for. They feel that why should I vote? But I'm out here and many of us are out here saying, no, your vote does matter. We need you to vote because when you vote, you make a difference. You see, yes, Deborah, state of Georgia, city of Atlanta. You're right about that. See, the voting really does matter. And we need to make sure that African Americans know that when they vote, they can swing elections to help us achieve not equity for just African Americans, but for everyone who is not a white male in society. Now, I do want to say something. I love everybody. I love my Black friends. I love my white friends. And I love and I'm going to tell you something about the term Black and white. That also in of itself was co-opted. Okay, it was co-opted to create more division. Because let me ask you this, my loves. Who's actually white like paint? I don't abide by that. You see, you know what I say? I tell my white friends, I said, you're not white to me, you're peach. You're peach. Who's white like that? And listen, am I Black? Am I Black like this strap? No, I'm brown. I'm brown. Now, there are my lovely brothers and sisters from the Sudan who are very dark tinted, and I love them, and they're so beautiful. But the idea of white and Black, doesn't that take away our identities? Because those who are European or peachy, right? They're Italian, they are Danish, they are German, they are Irish, right? You know, and then those who are people called Black but are brown, we are so many things, you see. So I like to try to take away that because it really diminishes the depth of who we are. And people use color, and the far right wing faction of society today in 2022 is using something so elementary, color, to divide us. Color. Let me tell you something. Two things. First off, do you want every flower to be blue? No. If every flower was blue, we'd get bored real quick. We'd be like, okay, wait a second. Can we get some color in here? We even like a nice plumeria. Have you seen a plumeria that's white on the outside and then some are pink and orange on the middle? Isn't that beautiful? We are different colors for diversity and beauty. We don't want all the same thing. Color is not a dictum of intelligence. That is the lie that has been told and proliferated over hundreds of years. Don't buy that. Don't buy that. When you see your brown sister or your peachy brother or sister, you look at them and you say, you are me and I am you. Let me tell you another thing. If you were in the hospital and you were not well, and I, unfortunately, I lost my life for some reason, but you don't know me, and you needed a heart transplant, and the doctor said, sir, ma'am, we have a heart for you. Someone is a donor and her heart is coming. Is the first thing you're going to say on your deathbed, what color was she? No, not at all. You're not going to ask that because you know inside we are all the same. You know that. My heart will beat in you like yours will beat in mine. So then why do we focus on those things? Well, it's used as an element of hate. Okay? And we cannot in our communities and in our cities let that sink down deeper. I want to have a moment here. Richard's going to set up and show you all a video. And it's a little 4-minute video, and I want to give you a break from me, and I want us to take the time. It's very wonderful, engaging about voting rights of African Americans, and again, the suppression that has taken place. And then we're going to go into the suppression that we see today and how we can fight against that. So, Richard, let's go ahead and bring that video up for everyone.
Throughout the month of February, Black History Month, I'll share stories highlighting issues and people making a difference. Tonight, I'm focusing on this year's theme, African Americans and the Vote. 2020 marks the 150th anniversary of the 15th Amendment, which gave the right of Black men to vote following the Civil War. To understand the present, we must first visit the past. The year was 1964. These 3 men were killed by members of the KKK in Mississippi. They were campaigning for all Black Americans to get the right to vote. 1 year later, in August of 1965, President Lyndon Johnson signed the Voting Rights Act, which eliminated the restriction on the voting rights for Black people. But 55 years later, Keith Mays says the fight isn't over.
The African American vote is under attack.
Mays is a professor of African American and African Studies at the University of Minnesota. He says the National Black History theme for 2020 speaks to the ongoing struggle for the right to vote.
Collectively, Black people don't really get the right to vote until 1965 with the Voting Rights Act. We have to understand what's taking place, which is to say that there are people who stay up every night looking to take that right away from us. An example of that are the voter suppression laws that you see in every single state in the union. And I think that if one would put the voter registration laws, voter suppression laws into context, you can actually compare them to some of the Jim Crow laws that were passed back in the late 19th century, early 20th century. Mainly the poll tax, the grandfather clause, and the literacy test.
As America prepares for the 2020 presidential election, Mays says there are already tactics underway to suppress the Black vote.
So we got the voter suppression laws, right? The new ones. Voter ID. We're going to get rid of early registration. We're going to get rid of absentee. We're going to get rid of we're going to curtail voter registration drives. You see the same thing today with a voter ID law. Nothing that on the face of it that says anything about race, but they know that African Americans, particularly African Americans who are poorer, who may not have a lot of means, who make a certain amount of money every year, they know for a fact that they are more likely than not to carry a government issued ID. And so that's how they get us. Many of us may not be registered, so we show up on election day and register that same day, but they're taking away our right to register on election day. The suppression is already underway. The question becomes, can the turnout mitigate against the suppression?
And when he talks about turnout, he's talking about the Black voter turnout. And when he talked about suppression, Here's an example he pointed to. In Texas, state lawmakers want criminal penalties for people who improperly fill out voter registration forms. If you look in Arizona, some Republicans there propose new voting rules complicating submitting an early ballot. And in Tennessee, GOP lawmakers are considering a bill that would fine groups involved in voter registration drives, which is something we've seen African Americans doing for decades.
And all these reasons why voting is the focus of Black History Month?
Exactly, for this year.
Huge issue. One thing that Professor Mays always said to me that when we talked about that, I thought it's just so silly. You know, when people talk about the black vote, you can't assume something's monolithic. That's ridiculous. We don't call it the white vote.
I think what they're saying when people say the black vote, it's saying that as a black person, your voice counts, your voice matters, and we are not a monolithic group.
Welcome to the future of press wires. EIN Press Wire.
So that video that you guys just watched,
The truth is, history shows us that for over
the video that you guys just took the time to watch, that was filmed in 2020, but I felt it was very apropos for us to watch today. The reason because that very same thing is happening right now. It is occurring, the voter suppression, the tactics, the saying that people in certain states like Arizona and Nevada cannot be offered water when they stand in line to wait. These kinds of things are occurring to suppress the vote of anyone. Now, listen to this, who is not voting in harmony with the Republican far right-wing faction of society. I want to leave you with this. November 8th, 2022, we get to decide as a country, where do we stand? This conversation from an African-American woman perspective is not just for African-Americans. It is for my Peachy brothers and sisters. It is for my Asian Americans. It is for my Latino or Latinx Americans. It is for everyone with every identification, Christian, non-Christian, Muslim, Hindu, Buddhist, anything. Because at the end of the day, we are not, and we should not be identified by, oh, you're an independent, you're a Democrat. That defines you. We are human beings first. And why are we here right now? Why are we with this podcast? Why are we always making the Time for Truth and Democracy Coalition? Because we love this country. And this country is the great experiment of the world. Can all races and all religions come together, not just in tolerance? No, but in acceptance of one another and say, you have every right to be, just to be. Not to be if you do, not to be because you did this, but just to be. And you have the right to be my neighbor. You have the right to have a voice. Your voice has the right to get a vote. So, what do we do to overcome the suppression? Are we helpless? Absolutely not. I was just talking to Richard Precita earlier today, and he was out walking in Buena Park, and he was with Alex Padilla. And it was wonderful. I was just out with the Democratic chair of Orange County out of Brasenio walking today for our candidates. So you can get out there and walk. If you can't walk, you can telephone bank. You can also send in also cards and mail to vote. But you can do this. And I challenge you all. We have 2 days left. Everyone on here, can you reach out with courage? Is this easy? No. Are some of us introverts? I'm sure. But I encourage you to reach out to at least 5 people and check and say, did you vote? Are you registered? Let's vote. Do you know who to vote for? I know you care about equality like me. Let's vote for the right people that are going to bring this. Because I'm going to tell you right now, if we as Democrats, those of you guys who are Democrats or identify, and I like to just say, those of you who believe in equality, if those of us who believe in equality and equity in this country, if we don't win, we will lose the House. And if we lose the House, a woman's right to her own body that was just overturned, they're going to go harder. they're going to go harder. They're trying to hold us back. And do not think that this democracy cannot be toppled. Rome wasn't built in a day, and Rome didn't topple in a day, but it did topple. This country is in peril, and we need everyone to stand up for the voting rights of every American. We need everyone to make sure that they are voting, and we need you to understand that you are here because your time is now. You are here for this purpose. I am with you. We were born at different times and on different days, but baby, we in this Zoom call together because we are here to ignite the vote. So I love you all. Stand tall, take courage, be bold, because for this time you were created, for this time you were made, and we must protect our country so that we don't go back to what we came from. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dom. Thank you. All right. So if you have questions, just in the reactions menu, there's a raise hand feature. That's the easiest way for me to do it. You know, talking about different colors, you know, Donald Trump is orange, right? So, but also I have this new painting, beautiful painting, and it reminds me of you, Dom. It's a woman with a blue, when your hair was more blue in some of the pictures, with a blue headscarf, all right, over her. And I call her my new girlfriend. She just sits on the wall looking pretty.
Oh my gosh.
I'll show it to you.
Okay.
But, yeah. So one thing that I was thinking when you were talking about it, reminded me of something I heard about. I don't know if you know about it or not, but the slave Bible, a Bible that had parts of it cut out because they didn't want the slaves to read the parts about liberation, the parts about the promised land, the kingdom of God, you know, and they didn't want them to read that, but they read it anyway somehow. They read it anyway, and they came up with what I believe is a truer theology than the church, than the evangelicals have come up with at all. And I really would like to see more preaching on that, you know, more of that preaching, because I think when we take a positive approach to this problem, we can talk about what it really means, what the Bible really means and what it really says, and not let them take it and define it for us. So it looks like we got Denise. So I'm going to bring you in here. Okay. No, that's not it. Let me see if I can do that.
Absolutely. That's so true. They definitely did, you know, really, I like to say decimate what the Bible really is about for the purposes of evil. And that is something that, you know, is a really, it's a bad stain on our history. And again, the one thing that history does for us all is that we can learn from it so that we don't repeat it. The problem is that many Americans today, in between the ages of 18 and 35, they don't take a hard look at the history too much. And their vote matters, and then they don't vote. And then we see a huge swing in the wrong direction. So again, we're learning from history. It's important. Yes, Denise, I think she had a question.
Okay, go ahead and unmute, Denise.
Yeah, I was just wondering in the video, I mean, I've heard of it before where they were saying that having a form of voter ID is a form of suppression, a government form of ID. What I don't understand though, this day and age, you have to have like a driver's license, Social Security and all that. So I don't understand how people could not have that this day and age.
Right. So many people, as the gentleman in the professor in the video was mentioning, many African Americans don't always have identification, and that might
you have to have those things.
Truly, I know, for different reasons. It's interesting. The African American community across the United States of America, many in poor areas with less income, also many, unfortunately, having been, not all, but some having been part of the criminal justice system. They are afraid of the government. They are very afraid of anything as it relates to and it might seem fairly benign for us, but they're afraid to even go to get an ID. They're afraid to go to the DMV. They're afraid of the government because they have learned that authority does not like them. Authority sees them as a threat for just being and existing. And that's really, I know it's so hard to understand, but that is the mindset of many African Americans, especially men, who are in fear. So, for example, Chicago. A lot of African Americans in Chicago on the South Side do not have proper documentation, and they a lot of times don't vote. You know, they don't go get their voting. In fact, a lot of young men who are, let's say, 18, they don't even go get their identification. And there's a lot of organizations working and going into those communities, trying to help people to say, listen, we'll help you get your identification. We'll help you register to vote and things like this. Many of them don't even want to register to vote because they're afraid for their names to be out there. So there is so many things that really and barriers for the African-American community because of the history of the racial inequities and the racial violence that many have been subjected to from authority. So there's that fear there, and that's something that we are working hard in our country to really overcome, because we do need our African-American brothers and sisters to realize that they matter and their votes do matter. But that's a part of the reason why some may not have that, Denise.
And I would add that we did have a couple laws that were attempted to be passed on democracy. And in one of those laws, I think the last one we had, and I forget what the name of that bill was, but it had provisions for voter identification. It just had the types of things that you could use.
Right.
And so basically it's okay, but when it's being used by people to exclude people, because you don't lose your vote, your fundamental, in my mind, your fundamental right to vote simply because you don't have a certain type of ID.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
That's a fundamental right. You can't just go willy-nilly, take it away from people just because they don't have an ID or they can't read or whatever. There's no legal basis for taking that right away from somebody. You have to accommodate that. So there have been laws. They tried to pass a law. It didn't pass, but to make sure that there's a wide variety of things that can be used for voter ID, but would allow the states to promote voter ID, to have a voter ID, as long as they complied and allowed all these different types of things to be used. And
go ahead. I'm sorry, Richard.
Yeah, and then we're getting right now to the state, what's it called? The state theory of interpreting of voting rights, as if states could be autocracies in the United States of America. No, this is a democratic country. It's the founder of one of the founding democracies in the world. And take a look at South America. Most of it is all democracy. It's been a model for the world. And really, there are only two types of governments right now, an autocracy and a democracy, and all those fine distinctions don't really matter as much. But the idea that somehow states in America have the right to be autocracies, to make their own laws and not be democracies. No, not in the United States of America. No, that's not the case. So, so that they can make their own laws, the federal government has always been able to set the standards, but we don't know what the Supreme Court's going to do.
And there has been data that has shown that using like county level turnout data, that around the country, researchers have seen that the racial turnout gap grew when the states enacted very strict voter ID laws. And so we've really seen that it's the enactment of these have reduced the turnout, and the turnout continued even after the strict voter ID law was repealed, because there was a time that many states did end up repealing it. But these are avenues that far right-wing faction is using, like literacy tests, to stop those people from who are Black Americans and others who are citizens from voting. So it's a very real issue. And unfortunately, it is a very awful tactic that is used. It's seemingly benign on its head, but like the video said, if you look at the underbelly, the real intentions are very, very, very not good.
Barbara, it's great to see you again. How are you doing? Go ahead and unmute.
Unmute. I'm hanging in there.
Awesome. Awesome.
As everyone else is.
Awesome.
Richard and I met a number of years ago during the pleasure of putting on a large event here in Orange County, trying to get up when progressives weren't as popular and we hadn't made the national news. It was the grunt work that led to that. So I'm always happy to reconnect with him. Wanted to briefly share, and this partially takes what Dom, everything very good about the voter suppression, but to also tie to one of the big myths and lies about immigration and the stories we tell. And let me be clear, I am not misspeaking when I say this is my great grandfather. It really is that few generations. Has to do with a couple late in life kids that condense things down. I've always wanted to say, I can tell you exactly what happens when you let illegal immigrants into this country. I know this guy, his story. He committed a crime that warranted the death penalty. Could have been hung by his neck till dead for the crime he committed. And because he was wanted for this crime, he snuck across the border into this country. No documentation, and he's a criminal. And no dispute that what he did was considered a criminal act, guilty as charged. He then served in our military and as a result, got his citizenship. And I can almost guarantee within a reasonable amount of thing that he was then granted the right to vote and never questioned again. Now the catch is, this is a guy who's English. He jumped ship from an English flagged vessel into Canada, which was a hanging offense to abandon your ship. This is in the early mid 1800s. So to jump ship like that was a big deal. Next thing is he sneaks across the border from Canada because Canada's part of the British Commonwealth and they can still grab him up and hang him or turn him back over to the British authorities. He fights for the Union Army in the Civil War and therefore is granted his citizenship. John Bacon, my great grandfather, I can almost guarantee was never charged a poll tax post Civil War. Never asked if his grandfather could vote, had voted, never had to take a literacy test. He was a white guy. And he immediately had more voting rights, even though he was a criminal, than African Americans who had been in the country 3 or 4 generations. And that's to contrast with how the African Americans post-Civil War were being treated. Here's a guy, he's a criminal. He just showed up here and he's now got more rights. And as a result, my 3 kids, college graduates, this is what both is an immigrant story. So we have, we need to realize these stories we tell and the things are stories of convenience and stories that we use selectively when they support what we want.
That's right. Yeah.
There were also hundreds and hundreds of Irish immigrants. There was no documentation. Many of them, quote unquote, could have been considered criminals in the way they fled, as far as the English were concerned, fought in the Civil War, got their citizenship, were given land, and never looked back.
It's what you say, Barbara, that somehow we get caught up in ideology. We get caught up in our propaganda. And we're looking for things. I mean, the whole market in the media is designed to give people what they want, and they're looking for what they want. If they don't want to hear it, they turn it off. You know, I just talked about
Well,
it.
I want to
Yeah.
respectfully disagree a little bit, Richard. I think some of it is that, and for those of you into a deep read, there's a book, it's called American Slavery, American Freedom. It started off as an academic piece. It's not entertaining reading, lots of footnotes and all that kind of thing, but it lays out the economic argument of why the original folks here rationalizing slavery and how they, realized they needed free labor and how they created this, and also how they created and realized that they were outnumbered, 99-1, and they needed to divide the poor whites from the African Americans, because if they united, those few rich landowners would have been in trouble. I think, Richard, it's not just we want to, we're afraid, and we let people tell us what to be afraid of. We let the folks, and it's to their advantage to keep us afraid of other things, as opposed to paying attention to what they're doing. That's
Right.
in the opinion of it. So, but from that perspective of fear is incredibly powerful. And if they can make you afraid, if they can convince you to fear, it's dangerous.
Yeah, and I think that's partly what I meant. We look for, and the media is appealing to those things that sort of trigger us. I was talking about how I just said something about doing a tarot reading on whether Trump was going to, or not Trump, but Putin was going to use nuclear weapons. So that triggers people. It triggers Christians because it's tarot. It triggers liberals because they don't believe in that. So I want to put in the chat, I think I'm going to put in the chat all the links that I promised I was going to put. And we're coming to the end of the program, I think, if it will. It's not going to do, it's going to take me a little while. So why don't you, thank you, Barbara, for your comments. And why don't you help me wrap this up as I start to try and put these links in the chat.
So yes, everyone, this is really, it's been a wonderful time together. Again, thank you so much for everyone coming together. Barbara, thank you for those very, very cogent points that you bring up, just in fact about, the rights for those who are voting, who were criminals versus those who didn't, who couldn't at all be being African American. I think it was very, very important for us to take note of that. And to everyone here in this room, I want you to always remember that when you come to the reason why I love the Truth and Democracy podcast is because it gives us all a voice. It gives us an opportunity to engage. It gives us an opportunity to really listen and learn. Going forward on the podcast, you guys are going to continue to get amazing speakers. We've had thus far great people on, very notable people who are fully informed candidates, as well as so many others in the future will be here. We are continuing to grow this coalition and this unifying body to do more and more across this country. So as you leave this today, I would like for you to take 3 things, and I want you to keep them close to your heart, okay? Here's the first thing. Number 1. Remember, who you are singularly, each of you on this podcast is so very important. You are of value to this country, but also to your families and to your neighbors. We need you. We need you very much. We need you to get out there and use your voice. We need you to take courage. You are important. Do not ever, ever diminish yourself in the power that you have. You know what I often tell people, because I'm in the health and wellness space, I say, many of us grow up in our families we didn't choose. And from those families, sometimes we develop traumas through the ages of 1 to 7 years old, right? And sometimes we develop the idea that we are not really important. But I want to empower you today to remember that you are. And I'm not just saying that to make you feel good, baby. I'm saying that because it's true. You are important. I need you. We need you. More importantly, you need you. So stand up tall, because every one of you, even if I can't see your face, we are in this together. So number one, you are important, or write it down. I am essential. Number two, America needs our movement. This is our movement. Truth and democracy, protecting America, uplifting this country, raising our voices against supremacy of any kind, raising our voices against hatred and bigotry. America needs to be protected. Democracy does not uphold itself. And by the way, the democracy that we all want and hope for, it wasn't a democracy that was created in the 1700s. That wasn't it, because those were still slave owners back then. The democracy that we want is what we will create. It is what our children will build up. Okay, so America needs to be protected. And number three, be active. Be active. Activate yourself. Come to these podcasts every month. Stay informed. Really. Okay? Raise your voices. Talk to people. Talk to the mailman. Talk to the person walking down the street. Talk to the person who's mowing the lawn. Talk to the nurse and to the doctor. Talk to the cash register cashier. Yes, be that person. I'm that person. And it's all right. It's okay and it's all right, because I take pride, Procida. I take pride. I take pride. And Procida knows me. He sees me. He knows this is the real truth. I take pride in standing up for what is right, for ideals in harmony with morals and ethics. You see, okay? So remember, use your voice. Ignite your voice. 5 people, guys. 5 people. You got 48 hours. Talk to them, call them, text message them. 5 people, make sure. Okay. And let's continue this conversation. Let's keep growing together. And listen, this is just the beginning, because Procida and I got some great goals for the future, ways we can even come and get together. So there's wonderful. So stay hooked in to the Truth and Democracy Coalition, because I am going across the nation. I am going to Washington, D.C. I've been to Washington, D.C. I am connecting to our highest candidates and elected officials. And my goal, we'll see, may be to run for Congress. So we have goals and we're going to achieve them. And I'm going to need you, and we're going to need to do this together. So keep building and tell people to join this podcast and stay glued into all the emails. Right, Richard?
Right. And remember to vote. Remember to vote. Also remember, we need our institutions, our Constitution, we need those institutions, support them, and go out and vote. Make sure our allies vote, the people you know.
And look at Hermione. Look at Hermione, Richard.
Yep. All right. Very good.
Yeah. That's right, girl.
All right. Thank you.
That's right,
Thank you.
Dixie.
Thank you, Hermione. Okay. Thank you, everybody, for coming today. Make sure to copy the chat and get the links from the chat. Register for our next events. We hope to see you, if you're possible, in Whittier early next year. We really want to make that an annual event. We need a national holiday to celebrate democracy on June 6th. So,
amen.
But Tuesday is the big day. Let's get out and vote. Let's get out the vote, and let's try and change this world. Thank you so much for coming and supporting us.
Thank you. And one more thing, if you want to follow me, stay connected on Instagram, domjones.unity, or Facebook, Dom Jones. Okay, so send me messages, stay connected. I want to keep us all glued in together as much as we can. Okay, and we're working on the Truth and Democracy Instagram, so that'll be another one handle to get it connected to. So thank you, guys. I love you.
Thank you. Share, like, and subscribe. Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.